construction of Hoover Dam gave birth to Boulder City. That meant that other places had to die. So that Boulder City could live, St. Thomas had to die. All up along the Colorado River, up close to the Arizona Strip, the LDS Church, the Mormons, had settled a number of little communities, farming communities. There was St. Joseph and St. Thomas. It was a significant and important little farming town.
Oh, it was really a good place to live. People were close and kind of took care of one another. The railroad ended down there at St. Thomas, and the hotel was really nice. And my mother and the older girls, they used to do all the washing and all the laundry for the hotel. So we didn't have electricity or running water or anything. And they washed all of those sheets and everything by hand on a washboard and ironed everything with a old stove iron that you heated on the stove. You didn't have anything to make life easy, I guarantee you.
It was a lovely little farming community where everybody knew each other, and it was established quite early in the late 19th century, mid-19th century.
We always had a wonderful garden. We had winter and summer garden, and you could grow all the year round down there. And we had lots of good food. I don't think anyone ever went hungry. Everybody had cisterns, most everyone had cisterns. And my dad was very careful about our cistern. We had the best water in town because he was so careful about when he filled it. When the cows weren't up and moving around, he'd fill it, you know.
It was along the Moapa River, the Muddy River.
It was no river. They always called it Muddy River, but it's just a ditch. Just an irrigation ditch like out here, only that it wasn't cemented. And it'd periodically, or they'd have a head gate and it'd pour over the head gate, it'd dig a hole, and that's where we'd swim. The boys swam naked. They would come and, there was one brave boy that would come and jump in with us girls, start naked, and the girls would go all directions so they could have the pond. He was a brat. And we went to school for everything. And it was a good school, a beautiful building, really a nice building. It was, if I remember right, a cement block. And there weren't a whole lot of kids. A teacher would have like 2 grades. And the whole upstairs was a stage and a big dance floor, very good dance floor. And that's where they had all their entertainments and everything. And that's where we went to church, and it was at the school and everything, because we didn't have a church down there.
They started construction on Boulder City in March 1931. And by the beginning of 1932, certainly by the summer of 1932, a year later, the town was largely built. And that includes, out of absolute desert, they graded the streets, they paved the streets, the sidewalks, the business district, the business buildings, the commercial buildings, the government buildings, the contractors' buildings, and all the homes that went with that were pretty much in place by the summer of 1932. It was really the first planned government town, and it was planned for the workers who were going to build Hoover Dam, and then they were going to tear most of it down. Well, it turned out they never really did tear down as much of Boulder City as they'd planned, and so it still stands today. That original portion still looks pretty much as it did in 1932-33, so if someone suddenly showed up out of time from 1932 and started walking down the street in Boulder City in 1999 or 2010, they wouldn't be lost.
Boulder City wasn't nearly as hot as it is over here. It wasn't very long until it was all grass and trees and beautiful place, I thought. compared to the valley, it was a beautiful place. I had 3 sisters over there, and I would go over and stay with them in the summer. They were all married and their husbands worked out there. The world was so far away from you then, you know, you didn't get around like you do now.
So when Hoover Dam was finished, they knew that Lake Mead, as it backed up, was going to eventually destroy St. Thomas. And this was something that they knew was going to happen, all through the 1920s.
Well, it seemed like as long as I could remember, I knew it was going to happen. Because they'd been talking about it, they'd been surveying and everything. And it seemed like I knew it for years. And I used to have nightmares about it. In my mind, the water was going to come up in a wall, you know. I was just a kid.
Once it had been settled that Hoover Dam was going to be built, and the people who lived in St. Thomas knew that their town was going to be drowned, they began making plans of various sorts to leave. And they began leaving probably in the early 1930s, once they had settled on figures that the government would pay them for their farms and their property.
My dad, I used to hear him say it's the best thing that ever happened to us because we were all so doggone poor that we probably would starve to death. Of course we wouldn't because we lived really good, but we didn't have any money, you know, and I don't think anybody fought it or anything. They just all moved out to different places.
As the dam was being finished in 1936, when the lake began rising to a point where it was actually ready to inundate the town, they were tearing down their buildings, they were leaving things behind, there were lots of tears. It was very sad because many people had been living in St. Thomas their whole lives, and some of them were old and knew that they were going to have to leave the only place they'd ever known.
Of course, when it came up, it came real fast because it was level down there, so it came real fast. If you'd go down there to look, you know, you had to park way back. If you didn't, you had water all around you when you got back to your car. It came up that fast.
I've often wondered what it was like to be in St. Thomas and watch the river and the lake advancing up that valley. Every day a few more feet, and it's down at the end of the block. You know, it's across the street, it's right outside my front porch, and I have to go because tomorrow my house will be gone. And I think that must have been terribly daunting to watch that happen and to know that everything you'd built and everything you'd known eventually was going to be 100 feet underwater most of the time.